Daffodils! Hey, it's Sarah Watts and welcome to my drawing channel. Today I'm going to show you how I draw a daffodil from the front view and the 3/4 view. This is part of my weekly floral series where I show you how to draw 12 flowers using just a pencil and pen. Also, if you want a printable step-by-step version of these daffodils that you can follow and even trace to get practice, you can get the PDF that I created by clicking the link below. Feel free to share your drawings on Instagram using my hashtag WattsFloralSeries. And let's do this. Alright, let's go through the supplies really quick. So first I'm using the Strathmore watercolor paper in the 300 series. It's a very affordable pad of watercolor paper, and I just really like drawing on watercolor paper, whether I'm adding wet media later or not. It just gives me a nice texture and I like the thickness of the paper. Some people prefer to draw on smooth paper. That's totally fine. Honestly, you can just use computer paper to practice this class. Then next I have a Tombow mono drawing pen in size 8. I love this pen. It's waterproof, so I can add watercolor or marker afterwards if I choose to. We've got the Tombow mono pencil in 2B and the light touch plastic eraser from Tombow. All these supplies are linked below, and I also have a discount code for the Tombow items. In this first part, I'm going to show you how I see a piece of reference and kind of design it into an illustration. And this is a photo that I took and then a photo that I licensed from Adobe Stock. So the first thing that I do when I'm drawing from reference is I look at it and I study it and I simplify it into the most basic shapes that I can, and I sketch those shapes onto my canvas, right? So when I see this daffodil, I see a circle that the petals are kind of contained within, and then I see an inner circle where those petals are growing out from, so I'll add that. And then you have your pistil and stamen kind of surrounding that. And then the really cool thing about daffodils is they have this really, it's almost like folded fabric, like a circle of folded fabric, and it creates this teacup shape. So again, if you saw my episode 1 video, you would know about how I kind of break flowers down into saucers, teacups, and spheres, or oranges. But you know, this folded fabric effect forms this teacup shape. So, you know, if you're looking at it as the piece of folded fabric, it might look something like this. So all these lines, you know, you've got a piece of rectangular fabric, and then when it gets folded up, kind of like the top part of curtains or the bottom part, it might look like something like this. And those lines, you know, we're kind of looking at it from above, and those lines stay parallel with each other because their shape is originally parallel, right? So now if you were to take this shape and coil it around a circle, it might look something like this. Right? So that's kind of what we're doing here. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing that outer circle of that folded fabric, and then kind of making a squiggle line to indicate those folds. Now I'm going to start adding these petal shapes, and you can break it down into, you know, just even lines that are crossing at this center point of the flower. Then I draw those petals as if, you know, they'll go behind this shape, this teacup shape, but I'm going to draw them as if that teacup shape is not there, just so that I get them accurate. Alright, now I'm going to draw a stem. And when I see this reference, I'm like, okay, daffodils, their leaves look a bit like blades of grass. And because I like to kind of design the composition, I'm not going to draw them like they are in this reference, I'm going to look at this reference and kind of do like an S curve. And then we've got our first leaf shape and our second leaf shape. So the 3/4 view of the daffodil will be this teacup shape. Sitting on a saucer. Now, if you were to take this and look at it from the side, you would see something like this, right? And then as you tilt it, you would start to see the inside of that teacup and a little bit of the top of the saucer. And it would keep going. So one thing to note is that this line, and this line are parallel to each other. So as they get tilted in space, they stay parallel. So that means that this would stay parallel with this one and this one, right? And then we'll make our pizza shape. This also looks a lot like the top of the orange in episode 1 of this series. Oh, that's not supposed to be there. All right, we have 6 petals. And these front ones would be kind of larger and a little bit squished because they're coming towards us in space. Now, when there's folds in the petals, that changes things a little bit, but I like to just kind of start simple. And then we have our curtain shape, and there'll be lines that kind of indicate the folds. And then I would design okay, so that's kind of how I would sketch the 3/4 view. Okay, so it's time to ink. For those of you that follow my work, you'll notice that a lot of my designs have like thick and thin lines, and I actually use a brush pen for that. I typically use the Pentel Pocket Brush for my line work, but you can also imitate thick and thin brush strokes without having to have that hand control that you would get from experience over time, just by using a pen that has a consistent line weight and then adding thickness to some parts of the drawing to give it that effect. Right now I'm using the Tombow Mono drawing pen in size 8, and I'm using the Strathmore watercolor paper, the 300 series. Now when you use watercolor paper and a felt tip pen, it'll wear your pen tip down a little bit faster, but I love buying pens, so it doesn't bother me. The reason I like to use watercolor paper is so that I can add watercolor later if I choose, but it also kind of gives it a nice little texture to the drawing. So we have the centerpiece, and I'll start with the top of the pistil and then the tops of the stamen, and those can just be kind of little almond shapes. Okay. Then we do the squiggly curtain shape that follows that circle, that top edge of the teacup. Then we'll make some lines coming down from the edges of the dips that go down to indicate the folds that go towards the center. And you'll want to be mindful of these lines that they all converge in the center, so that it really gives that effect of it growing out of that centerpiece. And then I leave it at that. Less is more with drawing. All right, so now I'm going to draw the petals. And then we have that centerpiece, and I like to have all of my lines be a little bit curved if possible to give it more of an organic feel. Now we're going to ink the stem. The second line takes some hand-eye coordination, so I would just go slow. And work from the top down so that you have a little bit of control. And then ink this first leaf. All right, so you could totally leave it like this. You could scan this in, bring it into Photoshop and color it if you wanted to. That's what I do with all of my work. I end up in Photoshop or sometimes Procreate. Or you could, you know, make it a finished piece on the paper, and you could add a little bit of thick and thin to it. You could add some watercolor if your original ink is waterproof. There's so many different things you can do with it. But I love line drawings because you really have a lot to work with when you work this way. So now I'm going to add just a little bit of thickness to the bottom sides of the petals to give it that sense that there's, you know, more weight down here on the petal than up here. So the thickness of a line can do a lot. It can give the illusion of weight, and it can also give the illusion of light. But right here I'm using it as a way to indicate a little bit of weight. Now I'm going to color in that center to give it a little bit of depth. And I'm going to add a little bit of weight to the parts of the curtain shape that extend upwards around the center. Now I'm going to add a little bit of ink to the tips to give that feeling of the tips kind of converging and getting thicker again at that very end point. Going to add some lines that kind of radiate from the center to give it a little bit more depth. One thing that's really useful is to turn your paper as you're going around an ellipse so that you have more control over the lines. Then you can add just a few extra little lines coming from the top folds of that curtain shape. Not too much though, you don't want to overdo it. And then I'm going to add some lines that kind of follow the contour of this petal. Since we're not using shading, we're just using line to kind of create the illusion of a three-dimensional shape. Now here I'm going to add the thickness to the parts of the stem that bend out. Okay. And the same with the leaves, with more weight towards the base to give it that feeling of the base being a little bit thicker. And you want that to kind of taper off really smoothly, so if you have to kind of sketch that in a little bit. I'm going to add a couple of little lines coming up on this leaf to give it a little bit of texture and movement. And then a little bit of thickness at the tips to indicate the sides kind of converging and getting thicker again. Alright, so I actually let the ink dry a little bit, and now I'm going in with an eraser and just getting rid of my pencil drawing. Okay, so now that I've erased the original pencil sketch, I could be done with this, or I could add some watercolor to it because the ink that I used is waterproof. Or I could scan it in and add some color in Photoshop or Procreate. There's so many things that you can do with a black and white drawing like this, and of course you could just leave it as is. So you can download the PDF below and copy my drawing and get some practice in on drawing the front view of a daffodil. Yay! Thank you. Alright, so now I'm going to ink the 3/4 view of the daffodil. First, I'm going to draw the rim of this teacup shape. And it's going to be a very squiggly kind of curtain shape, right? And following that ellipse. Then we have the base of the teacup, and that's a little bit smaller. So if you tilt your your drawing and to where you're looking at it straight up and down, it makes it a little bit easier to do this part. But I take the outermost squiggle lines, technical term, and kind of have them converge at this ellipse shape right here, and that will create the the 3/4 view of your teacup. And you might see this this line come down a little bit from behind where it's folding. And then from here, what I like to do is on the dips that go down towards the center of the flower, I'll add lines that kind of converge at the center to give that illusion of folded fabric, or in this case, flowers. So I just do that all the way around on all the parts that dip down towards the center of the flower. I'll just add a line that kind of, converges towards that center point, or the eye of the flower. Then we'll add the pistil and the tops of the stamen. Just make oval shapes for this particular flower. All right. And then we'll turn it back. And here I'm going to start with these front 2 petals because they need to overlap the ones that are coming behind it. So I'll start here. Then I'll draw that center line with a curve so that it gives this petal a 3-dimensional feel. And the second petal came from behind this petal, and that gives a really nice illusion that it's going back into space. All right, now I'll add a few little lines to give a little more dimension to those petals. And you'll see that on the petal of a daffodil, they'll have these kind of vertical lines that go from the base of the petal to the top, almost like they're made of crepe paper. All right, now I'm going to draw the stem, and that'll be coming from the center of the flower. So you just want to make sure that when that stem starts up, that it makes sense where it's coming from behind this petal. So if I were to hover over and just kind of follow this imaginary line, then I would set my pen down right where it comes out from behind that petal. So follow an imaginary line and then do the other side of that stem. I would go slow with this one because you want to keep those lines pretty parallel. They might get a little thicker towards the base. That kind of gives the illusion that it's like thicker where it's growing out of the ground. All right, and then here I'm going to start with this leaf. And I just do that in a quick swooping motion so that I keep the integrity of that really elegant line. Elegant. Then we've got this. Now this is the front edge of this folded petal. Now from here I'll do the center point, kind of showing on that top part of it folding towards us, right? And then I'll do the far edge. Okay. Then that far edge will come out and start up again right here. And then that center point will sort of start up again right here. So again, you can take a piece of paper and cut it in the shape of the petal or leaf that you're trying to draw, and try bending it around and drawing those different views, and that'll kind of help you to draw things like this. From here, I'm going to thicken up some of the lines to give it a little more contrast and dimension, and that will be sped up. Again, whenever you're adding accent lines to your petals, or the leaves or anything, you'll kind of want them to be a little bit curved so that they feel more like they're following an organic object instead of something that's more straight. All right, and then I let it dry and erase the original pencil sketch. All right, so there's the 3/4 view of the daffodil. Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to draw a daffodil from the front view and the 3/4 view. And I also wanted to show you how you can add a little bit of color, or you can even compose the flowers into one piece to create something new. So this one I just added Tombow dual brush pens and used those to create a watercolor effect. And then in this piece I used liquid watercolor to kind of add some splatters and a little bit of color. So it's super fun to draw with black and white and then try color on top of it. So thanks for watching this tutorial on daffodils. If you liked it, go ahead and shoot me a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button so that I can continue to grow my channel and make more drawing tutorials. See you on the next video.